Story 1. I was fired once when I was 16 and working at a grocery store. A coworker asked me to take their shift. I said I could not. The next day, the manager called me asking why I was not there. I said I was not scheduled, and they told me the coworker had said I had agreed to work for them. I told them that I never agreed to it, and they said I had to come in. I did not come in. Story 2. Yes, I mixed up the customs declarations for 2 documents, and the company driver was suspected of smuggling and was administratively detained in China for several days. Story 3. The environment became toxic, and I decided to see how long it would take to notice that I showed up only when I felt like it and stopped doing pretty much anything productive. The answer was about 4 months. Story 4. Not explicitly. I was just never put on the schedule again. Never a word was said to me. I might still be an employee at that Rita's Italian Ice for all I know. Story 5. I got fired from Target for speaking out about the fact they made us clock out at 10 p.m. but locked us in until they checked our section. Sometimes that meant sitting around for an hour after we clocked out. Forget large corporations and their slave mentalities. Story 6. The first time was with a company I had developed a section of a division for. I had a relatively new boss who was hostile towards anyone who had worked there before him. I was sick on a Monday, told to stay home Tuesday, then released on Wednesday for apparently not calling or showing on Tuesday, despite having the email from him that told me to stay home. His boss was not aware I was fired and found out when he referenced me in a meeting with executives, and they told him that I'd been let go. The second time was when I injured my hand at a job. I tried to tough it out for a day and made it through half of the next day before bringing it up to my boss. He told me to go to urgent care and get a note saying that I'd gone, and if I needed any light duty. He was very friendly about it. Then he asked me what I did that weekend to hurt it. I told him I'd actually heard it the day before at work. His demeanor became very cold, and he told me I needed to leave. The next morning, I was filling out paperwork for being terminated for not reporting a workplace injury on time. Story 7. In my early 20s, I was a trainee manager of a shoe shop. When I was alone there, I opened late and closed early. They found out by noticing when the alarms were set and then fired me. Completely fair enough. Story 8. I got hired for a job. This factory was adding a new production line and adding new tooling for the existing lines. It was a 2-year project. The week before I showed up, my boss's boss was fired. The first week I was there, 2 of my boss's peers and their whole teams were fired. About 2 months later, my boss and his last remaining peer were fired. No one fired me at first. My 3 teammates and I sat around for 3 months before the company realized we were still there. They eventually sat us all down and said, "We were clearing house in this department. You were not supposed to be hired. Get out." Story 9. I went to the emergency room instead of work. Came back with an emergency room note, and they said, "We won't be needing that. Can you come with us?" I was 18 and it was my first full-time job. Story 10. I waited to be severed. Ridiculous corporate environment for 17 years with a new horrible, unethical, lying boss, and I didn't quite see eye to eye on how to treat people. Devastating, but I received a great severance, relaxed for almost 2 years, received pay and a half the entire time, and now have another job where the people aren't actually trying to destroy each other's careers. Story 11. Because I was a good and honest English as a second language teacher, the new principal in the school wanted everyone to pass no matter what, so they would continue paying. You needed 80% to pass according to the rules. I failed students with 50% and the boss still passed them to the next level. Because of this, every new group I taught had students speaking as beginners in an intermediate course and I had to fail more people even though I knew the principal didn't like that. In the end, the principal decided not to assign me more groups. Story 12. I got called into a mandatory meeting on my day off when I was going to be out of town dealing with an appointment with a lawyer. It was a pointless meeting about nothing by a transferred manager who just took over and whom I disliked. He ended up getting fired as well because he was an incompetent manager. He tried to fire me a couple of weeks earlier by scratching out my 11 o'clock start time and handwriting in 8 o'clock without consulting me first. Story 13. A friend in college got me a job at the takeout counter at a restaurant he worked at in a nearby beach vacation town. I spent 90% of my time eating the food and flirting with girls that came in, and was fired in just a matter of days. Never was there a more justified firing. Story 14. Once, for gross insubordination, I was working at a lube shop, cleaning down below where workers would access people's oil pan and filter. I was in a bit of a mood since the other guys were busy fooling around with each other, and I just wasn't into it that day. Out of nowhere, I heard from above, "Hey, watch this." Suddenly, the three guys above opened all of the waste oil valves, sending a torrent of used motor oil spilling onto the floor. I just shook my head and continued cleaning the area I was working on. The manager demanded that I hurry up and clean this new, massive mess. I told him that he and the others could clean their own mess. He threatened my job. I laughed and responded that he'd definitely have to clean his own mess that way. He didn't see the humor in my response and fired me on the spot. Fun postscript. About a year after this event, September 11th occurred. The manager in this story was no longer working at the lube shop but as security at a hotel. He was caught calling in a fake bomb threat to the hotel he worked at right after September 11th. Story 15. I sent my employment contract from my work email to a personal email. The IT department saw it within minutes and asked me about it. I told them I wanted to have it to review whenever I needed to. They told my boss. My boss said they could not trust me anymore. I was only employed for 8 days. Story 16. Yes, because I was lazy and had a bad attitude. Maybe I didn't want to sweep around the register, Olin. Don't be harsh. I was 15 and he wasn't wrong. Life has a way of knocking that out of you. Story 17. I got fired at 17 from the movie theaters. I got offered a demonstration job contract that started in a month, but it would only be for 2 weeks. I told my manager right away that I wouldn't be available. She scheduled me anyway and then fired me for not showing up. Story 18. Once, 19 days ago on New Year's Eve, I was the sole user experience designer for a startup. There were lots of reasons, probably. It was kind of a relief, and I didn't bother to ask why. I could have stood to have more experience going in, but I also definitely believe there were a lot of unrealistic expectations set by the chief executive officer. Story 19. I walked to the back office to get my boss to check my area so I could clock out. He was in the process of being intimate with one of the waitresses. She was sitting on the floor, her underwear around her ankles, wiping her mouth with a big grin. He was cussing me out while trying to tuck in his shirt. I was called in for a meeting the next afternoon to address my poor performance issues and was let go. Story 20. I took a promotion into a high-turnover area to get out from under a toxic boss. I found I didn't have the right skill set or the speed to keep up with the pace they expected. I got a bunch of chances, but they ultimately fired me. I have never felt so relieved in my life as the day I got fired. That job put me into severe burnout and anxiety. I was a new father with a son who didn't sleep and spent half of the night awake with him and the other half dreading the workday. I often daydreamed about getting into a car wreck on the way to work. I eventually ended up where I am now, the happiest I've ever been with a job. I learned a lot about myself and my skill set over the next few months I was unemployed. Moral of the story: don't work at an insurance claims call center. Story 21. Attempted to discourage the company from committing multiple types of fraud and refused instruction to personally commit fraud. Got my walking papers in my personal email about a week later. Story 22. The owner's nephew wanted to try bartending, and the most recent hire, me, was let go to make room for him. He lasted 2 weeks. Then, in another job, I was let go with a 5-day notice because one of the higher-ups was annoyed by my speech impediment. Story 23. A student of mine cheated on my final exam. I gave him an F for that, which led to failing the class. Well, he was going to fail the class regardless. It turned out that he was a precious son of one of the board members. They fired me and gave him a passing grade. Story 24. I got hired for a job, and when I showed up for the first day, they put me in a different position. Apparently, everyone in the position I was in was told the same thing when hired. I complained to my manager, but she dismissed my concerns. I complained to her boss, and he sided with me. A few days later, the first manager fired me for some made-up reason. This was at Disney. Story 25. 25 years ago, I was fired from Taco Bell. The reason? I didn't lie well enough to the customer about how long the order would take. Funny enough, the manager who fired me is now my coworker at another job, and I'm his superior. Story 26. I no longer aligned with the company values. What I think it actually was that the bosses wanted to roboticize or automate a certain aspect of our business, and I was vocal in my opinion that it severely impacted our product quality. Story 27. In high school, I had a job working at a pizza restaurant on the weekends. The owner of the restaurant knew I was a three-sport athlete and did not have any availability for weekday shifts. One random day, he approached me and said that he needed me to be able to do more shifts or he would have to let me go. He knew this when he hired me. Why did you hire me then? Story 28. My very first job. A woman in the office was extremely rude to me for absolutely no reason, unknown to me at the time. One day, she went too far and I called her out on it. She told the manager that I disliked her because she was a lesbian. If you know me, I have two dads. I was probably her biggest ally in the store. After being fired, I learned she wanted me gone because her nephew needed a job. Story 29. I got fired as a waitress because I didn't completely memorize the menu, each item and ingredients, sauces and ingredients. It's a busy restaurant, so they didn't want us to slow the kitchen down by asking if this item included this or that item included that. Being familiar wasn't enough. You were supposed to know off the top of your head. When we'd have special items, like a daily special or event dish, they'd list off the ingredients and expect you to know them as well. This was not a fancy restaurant either. We all wore jeans and t-shirts. Story 30. The first time I was fired, it was because I left 45 minutes early on my last day at McDonald's. I had previously given notice, and this was my last scheduled workday. It was a slow night, and I wanted to go to a party at a friend's house. It made me laugh when I found out my manager fired me for that. The second time was because I was working remotely from home, and the company I was with shut down the office in my state. Although I didn't work out of that office because it was a 6-hour drive from my house, there were some tax or legal reasons they couldn't keep me on as a contractor. They gave me the option to relocate to their state or take a substantial severance package, so I chose the severance and took almost a year off from working, which was pretty cool. Story 31. First time was at a popular dining chain. The proprietor was using corporate dollars given to unhappy clientele as his own personal petty cash, writing off a 20 or a 50 to corporate, and then taking that amount out of the master till. I reported the discrepancies as I was head waiter 3 times a week and had to do the closeout. No one else wanted to make a big deal out of it since he had to sign off on the books at the end of the week anyway, so it would fall on him. Corporate came and did a full audit, realized the scheme. Someone blew the whistle on me, and I got fired for theft of product even though the product they claim I stole is something I'm highly allergic to, seafood and shellfish. Shortly after that, he was removed from his proprietorship. I lost a poor dime a dozen job. He lost a $120,000 sink. Story 32. Not me, but my coworker at a large grocery chain got fired for inhaling 300 cans of whipped cream in one weekend. We were both in high school. He was in the manager's office with his dad, our manager, and the sheriff. I can still picture the expression on his face. Story 33. I was Santa's elf at a Kroger for a few weeks when I was 18. They wanted me to direct people back to Santa from the front of the store. If no one was coming in, I would sit on the bench and watch for people coming. Phones were not as much of a thing back then, but they didn't want me to sit at all except for lunch. I got caught sitting one too many times. I wasn't broken up by it. It was cold, and most people just ignored me. Story 34. I just got fired for being sick on a protected leave of absence. Gave my return and they suspended me for whatever reason. Asked why, was sent a termination. Now I'm on unemployment because nobody will hire in January. I'm about $800 in debt with bills I haven't been able to pay. It's frustrating. I don't know what to do, aside from keep trying. I go to bed every night wondering what I'll be doing the next day, and I'm starting to become incredibly depressed. I cleaned the house all day today, which is good. But that won't pay rent, so what the hell, man? Story 35. Yeah, officially fired once and let go once. I got fired from my first job. I worked at a doggy daycare and boarding facility, and I messed up 3 times over 3 months. First, I misdosed a dog on their medication. They were trusting 16-year-olds to dispense medication to pets. And in hindsight, I'm like, what was I thinking? But in the moment, I didn't even know I had misinterpreted the label and felt really bad. The dog was fine, though. Second, one particular day I was in charge of small dogs. There was a family group of medium dogs that should have gone out with the large dogs, but I got blamed because I didn't remind the large dog person. Still don't get that one. Third, I missed a night shift. A few people would come at 8 p.m., well after closing, to take the dogs out one last time before bed, and I told them I couldn't work that day because my family was moving, but I didn't text it or write it down, so there was no record. I got let go because I was a temporary to hire worker and told my boss, at the company I was working at, not the hiring manager, that I was pregnant. I got let go for performance issues 2 days later, even though my numbers hadn't dropped, and I was doing the work of 2 people. She was annoyed that I was taking more bathroom breaks and eating lunch at my desk while I worked and napped in my car during my lunch break. Stuff happens. I'm a good employee and I work hard.